You're watching the Everything Network.
Thomas Andretta sits in the record as a New Jersey Teamsters figure with a second identity written in the margins, a Genovese associate tied to the Anthony Provenzano circle, and repeatedly named in the long-running Jimmy Hoffa disappearance file. He is described as a business agent for Teamsters Local 560, living in Hasbrook Heights, with his brother Stephen Andretta appearing in the same lane as an alleged hitter. The timeline most often attached to him runs from union work and rackets convictions into the Hoffa investigation, then into the C-Train labor to payoff case that ended in heavy federal time. He was born on January 1st, 1938, and he died on January 25th, 2019, with his last years spent in Las Vegas. Mob historians view Thomas Andretta as a legit union employee on paper, with Local 560 functioning as the steady cover that kept men close to power without daily street exposure. Anthony Provenzano is described in the same record as both a Genovese captain and the president of Local 560, the kind of combined position that turned routine labor disputes into leverage. Andretta is placed inside that orbit, close enough to share the room with top-level figures, far enough to keep his name out of the headlines until investigators forced it forward. His criminal background in the record includes convictions tied to hijacking, loan sharking, and a counterfeiting scheme in 1971, followed by 2 years in federal prison. That matters in a pure timeline sense. It puts him on the government's radar well before the Hoffa case becomes his defining mention. On July 30th, 1975, the Hoffa case becomes the axis point. Hoffa is described as scheduled to meet Anthony Provenzano and Anthony Giacalone at 2 p.m. at the Marcus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, and then vanishing without a trace. Another version in the same general file trail spells the restaurant name slightly differently and renders Giacalone's name differently. Yet the fixed elements stay stable: a Detroit area restaurant parking lot, a planned sit-down, Hoffa not coming home, and the vehicle left behind. Police locate Hoffa's car at the restaurant, and there is no public sign of where he went next. Investigations begin immediately and continue for years across multiple agencies, with no definitive conclusion in the official outcome line. The same record preserves the alibi lane that followed. Giacalone and Provenzano are described as not being near the restaurant that afternoon, and both deny scheduling the meeting. Provenzano tells investigators he was playing cards in Union City, New Jersey, on the day Hoffa disappeared, with Stephen Andretta named as part of that card game setting in at least one account. That detail matters in the way investigators read the Provenzano circle. It ties the Andretta name to the day itself, not only to later rumor. It also sets the shape of the inquiry. The Detroit disappearance connects back to a New Jersey power node tied to Local 560. By May of 1975, a Provenzano driver named Ralph Picardo is already in Trenton State Prison for the murder of a New Jersey loan shark, and investigators begin receiving information from him after Hoffa disappears. Picardo's account, as preserved in the file, claims Hoffa's killers forced him into a 55-gallon drum, loaded the drum onto a truck, and shipped it to an unknown destination. That story becomes one of the enduring disposal claims in the case record: a specific container, a truck movement, and an endpoint kept off the page. Picardo's role also matters in the later Union payoff case, where appellate summaries describe him as the government's chief witness against the Provenzano group in the C-Train prosecution. On December 4th, 1975, the record shows the Andretta name pulled into settings. A federal investigator in Detroit testifies in court that a witness identified 3 New Jersey men as participants in the Hoffa abduction and murder with Thomas Andretta, named alongside Salvatore Bergoglio and Gabriel Bergoglio. Around the same time window, prosecutors subpoena Thomas Andretta and Stephen Andretta to appear before a federal grand jury in Detroit, and the file says they invoked the Fifth Amendment and refused to answer questions tied to their knowledge of the Hoffa case. From there, the public record keeps the same line. Nobody has been convicted of Hoffa's murder, and the official file never closes with a single confirmed narrative. Violence around the Provenzano circle continues to show up in later entries, and one of the sharpest is the March 21st, 1978 killing in Little Italy. One account in the file calls the victim Salvador Bergoglio, and it describes a gangland-style shooting on Mulberry Street, 2 gunmen firing repeatedly into the chest and head. That same account says the victim had allegedly been talking with prosecutors and was preparing to make a deal tied to testimony against Provenzano, and that he was scheduled to appear in court with Provenzano and Harold Königsberg tied to the murder of Anthony Castellito. The same write-up adds an unusual detail. 2 NYPD intelligence officers were allegedly present, trailing Genovese Captain Matthew Ianiello, and the shooters escaped. Another eyewitness in that account identifies underworld figure Joe Scarborough as a possible shooter. The Andretta story does not end in the Hoffa file. It folds into a separate federal prosecution built around labor payoff money. Court summaries describe labor peace payoffs tied to C-Train, with the conduct alleged as running from December of 1969 through June of 1977, and names listed as Anthony Provenzano, Thomas Andretta, Stephen Andretta, and Gabriel Bergoglio. In that summary, the payoffs are described as received from entities tied to Interocean Services and DI Job Leasing, and the convictions produced hard sentences. Provenzano and Thomas Andretta receiving 20 years, with Stephen Andretta and Gabriel Bergoglio receiving 10 and 7 years. Separate case reporting also preserves the simple public line. Thomas and Stephen Andretta were convicted in 1979 on RICO charges tied to labor peace payoffs connected to C-Train. The Hoffa case made their names famous. The C-Train case is what produced the prison time. After the C-Train conviction, the record places Andretta away from the New Jersey and New York center of gravity. He spent his final years in Las Vegas, and death notices list his life dates as January 1, 1938 through January 25, 2019. When the timeline is put together cleanly, it reads as a 3-part arc. Local 560 is the platform, July 30, 1975, as the moment his name enters the Hoffa investigation lane, then the 1979 labor to payoff case as the formal conviction chapter. The Hoffa disappearance remains unresolved in official terms, and the file preserves that ambiguity even while naming suspects and witnesses. Andretta remains one of the men who show up whenever the Hoffa case is summarized in lists, and the same name also shows up in appellate language describing a concrete criminal enterprise around labor peace payments.